to see the teddy bear here to play. If you don't come play with us, then we will kill you.
Welcome back to season 3 of the Dudes of the Dead podcast. If you missed season 1 or season 2, including our top 10s of 2021 and 2022, you can find all of our previous episodes on Apple, Spotify, Anchor, and Google. I'm Leatherface Lee.
And I'm Maniac Mike. This season, we've added an email for the show, dudesofthedead@gmail.com. Feel free to email us your thoughts on the films we discuss, and we're also asking for listener requests for Season 4. So email us a film if you'd like us to review it in Season 4, whether it's a personal favorite, a controversial film, or a hidden gem starring Nicolas Cage.
We can't wait for you to listen to season 3, including some appearances from friends of the pod, as well as some bonus episodes. We're also on YouTube at Dudes of the Dead Podcast.
This season, we're excited to review some standouts from 2022, some older classics, and as well as some new films from 2023. We'd also greatly appreciate if you'd be willing to leave us a rating and a review. Thanks for joining us again, and
We'll see you in the aisles.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to a special bonus episode of Dudes of the Dead podcast. Today, we're going to be looking at Infinity Pool, directed by Brandon Cronenberg, who also directed Possessor, which we could maybe talk a little bit about. And so this was brought about, we received an email from a listener, Max Nodwell. So thank you to him for sending us an email. He asked about Infinity Pool and if we were going to review it. And we thought, we really appreciate fan engagement that he was willing to email us and took the time. So we wanted to make sure that we fulfilled his request. And so we are recording this special bonus episode on Infinity Pool. So Max, thanks for emailing us, and hopefully we do it justice, and
no kidding.
you appreciate this episode.
I don't understand why we're doing this. We barely know these people.
It's one day to mix things up a bit.
Mr. James Foster, you'll have to come with us.
Here, the punishment for any crime committed is death.
So Infinity Pool received a 6.1 on Internet Movie Database. And not surprising to me, it had a critic score of 87%, but an audience score of 51%, which is kind of what I expected.
Yeah.
Because this is a special bonus episode, and partly due to the nature of this film, this will be full spoilers.
Yeah.
So if you've not seen Infinity Pool, we've been trying to have a format where we talk about non-spoiler first and do spoilers at the end. But for this particular episode, this will be full spoilers, so you have been warned. I highly recommend you go check this one out first and then come back and listen after you've watched it. So this has an amazing cast starring Alexander Skarsgård as James Foster. And of course, he was in The Northman. Did you see The Northman?
I did.
Yeah.
And he was also in The Stand.
Of course. Yeah. He was Flag.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I didn't actually realize that till just now. And the amazing Mia Goth as Gabby. So she's obviously been very busy shooting X and Pearl, and the new one is coming out soon. But she's been busy. And I appreciate her being in many, many horror films. So, all right. So our synopsis for Infinity Pool. James and M. Foster are enjoying an all-inclusive beach vacation in the fictional island of Latolka when a fatal accident exposes the resort's perverse subculture of hedonistic tourism, reckless violence, and surreal horrors. Yeah, so are you a fan of Brandon Cronenberg or David Cronenberg?
David Cronenberg's early stuff, absolutely, like Rabid and those kinds of things. It's like a train wreck. You just can't stop watching, but it's just horrific, like his body horror. And it seems like Brandon has followed somewhat in his father's footsteps, because there's some serious body horror in some of his films. So I did not like Antiviral. 2012, but I was a big fan of Possessor.
Yeah, same. I really liked Possessor.
And I could definitely see visual reminiscences from, he has a certain style, particularly in the psychedelic sequences, I find. And it's like, oh, okay, that's almost, I don't know if I want to call it, he hasn't had enough movies to call it a trademark or necessarily his style, but it seems like he has a vision that looks a certain way, and I'm seeing some repetition in his work. And I like what he has to say. I mean, this one had some serious body horror and other things that really made it a challenging watch in a good way for me.
I find David Cronenberg maybe a little bit too out there. I find the Brandon Cronenberg ones have some elements of David Cronenberg, but it's a little more straightforward, maybe a little easier to follow, but still some stuff to chew on.
For sure. I mean, you've got to, I think, look at era context there.
Yeah,
I mean, David Cronenberg's coming up in the early 70s and onward. And that's a time of experimental film and psychedelic stuff and that's all reflected in his work.
I think Crash was the first movie I ever watched that was kind of like an art film that was not just your Hollywood blockbuster. Like I think I was a teenager and I was like, oh wow, okay, yeah, this just kind of opened up a whole new world of more art house film.
I do think he's more accessible in many ways but he's definitely still out there. I mean, Possessor was not a film for the masses, I don't think.
No, and I think this one will be a bit polarizing. Yeah. We can talk about that later, but depending on what you want from a horror film, this might be satisfying to you or it might be kind of disappointing.
Yeah, and I also think if you don't like political messaging mixed in with your horror, you might not like his work either, because I think there's a strong message underlying this.
And this is kind of like Titane or Men or...
Yes.
You have to do some work. There's a lot of like symbolism and metaphor happening.
100%.
And it's not just a straightforward film. And I like that in movies. Yeah. I think you do too.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
I mean, there's a time and a place for them. I wouldn't want all my movies to be like that, but typically I kind of like the puzzle or having to try to figure out what a film is doing. So I like this film. I know some people really don't like that. So
I wouldn't want it to be my full diet of horror films. I mean, that's the beauty of watching something that's, completely exploitative and something that's much more thoughtful. You can have it all in horror, which is why it's such a great genre for me, because you can watch something that's just awful, but it's just, it's fun to watch. It's a fun watch. And then you can watch something that's really thought-provoking and really gets under your skin and into your head. And it's all within the same, umbrella genre of horror, right?
But this is not straightforward like Scream or The Conjuring or something. It's
not at all.
A little more arty. So I thought, I'll just give a bit of a synopsis or a bit more detailed synopsis. So James Foster is an author. He's on his vacation with his wife, and his wife comes from money. So I don't think he's a very popular author, but he's able to live this lifestyle because of who he's married to. So on vacation in Latolka, he meets Gabby, who is Mia Goth, and Albin. And so they get to talking and they get to know each other, and they eventually decide that they want to sneak out of the compound. So all the tourists stay in this one kind of like an all-inclusive resort, but it's a compound. You're not supposed to leave the compound. And so they sneak out, they get drunk, and James Foster decides to drive them home because he feels like he's the most sober. And he accidentally doesn't see a local resident and ends up hitting them with the car and killing them. And so they try to get away with it. They get arrested, and they discover that in Latolka, there's this kind of like eye for an eye revenge thing, that if you commit murder, then that family has the right to kill you. But there's a loophole. If you are wealthy enough, you can pay money to have yourself cloned and have your clone killed as the payment for the punishment, and you get to go on living. And so that creates an interesting scenario where some tourists have figured out that they can exploit this loophole by getting away with literal murder and doing whatever they want, and can always just pay their way out of it. And so this film kind of explores these themes of these rich travelers who have a hedonistic lifestyle of terrorizing locals. And because they're rich, they can just pay to do it as much as they like with no consequence.
And I like how it's implied, I don't know if it's ever stated, but it's implied that the compound nature is to protect the tourists from the locals. Yes. But you realize later on, it's like, no, that's the other way around.
The other way around. Right? That was very clever.
Yeah, no, I don't think you missed anything. I feel like, and that's where I feel some of the political messaging is coming in. It may be political is not the right word, but certainly there's messaging there about how when we travel, we often do things that we wouldn't do if we were at home. And he takes it to an extreme. Mm-hmm. But I mean, if you've traveled at all, you see that around the world, people doing things that you wouldn't do if you were in your hometown and you were worried about seeing your next door neighbor the next day. What I loved about the loophole that he plays with, I think the entire film, is because of the nature of at least this is how I interpret it, because of the nature of the process of the cloning, and you're kind of out of it when you're cloned. When you come out of it, you're not sure who the clone, like, are you really you?
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you about that.
This is something that I feel I really like about Brandon Cronenberg's work, because I felt like it was a theme in Possessor as well, is that idea of identity and who am I? Who are you? Can I know myself? can I know you? I just feel like he really skirts the edges of those things and plays with them. And despite my frustration at times in the film going, what, is he the double or is he the real guy? And who's the Mia Goth character and her husband? Are they doubles? Are they the real people? Have they, like, when they go home at the end of the vacation, who's going home and who comes back? And I really like that. I mean, it's ambiguous. It's frustrating because
there's really no way to know. I don't think for sure.
You never answer it.
And what was your take? Like, I assumed, just because I find these movies tend to be kind of dark and cynical, that he probably, the real James, what's his last name? Foster. The real James Foster was actually killed, and it was the clone that
That's
probably
what I
went to
thought
live
too.
on. Is that what you thought too? Yeah.
Yeah.
I like how the Cronenbergs tend to inject elements of science fiction into their films.
Yeah.
But I feel Brandon Cronenberg's a little more restrained. Some of the David Cronenberg stuff gets a little too out there for me, I think, in the science fiction. Like Crimes of the Future, I struggled with. I found that to be a little too out there. But this feels plausible. We already know we can clone things. So
yeah.
I like that it felt real enough, and maybe in 50 years or 25 years or whatever, something like this could actually conceivably happen. But it creates a really interesting kind of ethical question. And
I mean, the one thing that I'm not bothered might be a strong word, but the one thing that niggled me a little bit was when he hits the local and then he's arrested, and he finds out that Gabby and her husband and his wife, now he could be just lied to, but the police officer says, they said that you stole the car and you did. He never questions any of that. He never says, well, that's BS. Like they rented the car from the local and whatever. Now, I think in hindsight, of course, that was all a setup from Gabby and her husband.
Yeah.
Now they didn't set up the accident, but they certainly were open to the possibility that something would happen.
And they have this club of people. So it seems like they're trying to initiate new people into their little club. Yeah.
Mia Goth is terrifying in this film. Like not in a monster way, but in a human as a monster, as a terrible human being.
Yeah.
She is absolutely gave me shivers in some of the scenes.
And her ability, and she does this in Pearl and stuff as well, but to flip from really sweet and seductive and lovable to cruel and completely malevolent. She is. She's. I think the performances in this film are great. Like I think both Skarsgård and Mia Goth are amazing. Like I think they are the highlights probably in this case.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've liked everything Skarsgård has been in. I think he's a really interesting actor. And like I say, Mia Goth was like just so creepy and unnerving in this one. Cronenberg with there's some psychological scenes. The masks, the party masks that they have are absolutely terrifying to me. Like I get a sense that he's playing with that idea of identity and because the masks are disfigured in that psychedelic way. Like, if you're on mushrooms and you see things in a really weird way, not that I would know that, but I've heard those were really terrifying to me.
So do you feel like one of the central themes of the film then is, are human beings only well behaved because of our fear of punishment? And if we no longer have to fear punishment, are human beings innately evil? Like, I feel like that was interesting. And that's where I was wondering with the masks. Like, do we wear a mask, but deep down we're actually demonic or evil when we know we can get away with murder literally and there will not be consequences? I thought that was kind of an interesting.
I do feel that's interesting because I feel very similar. I think there's the mask of civility that we wear and the mask of propriety. But really, human beings are depraved, sadistic things.
Yeah.
And if you remove the fear of consequence in whatever form that takes, then all of your baser instincts will come to the surface. If you could do whatever you wanted to do, I don't know. Like I can't answer that, of course. But I feel like if I wasn't restrained by propriety and consequence, probably a lot of things I would do.
And there might be times where people are not at their best, or in the heat of the moment, perhaps you would act on emotion or instinct more and, do something bad, but the logical part of your brain knowing the consequences keeps you in check. I was thinking about this last night, but then on the other hand, human beings in all different societies do eventually kind of develop laws around the reason we have these laws in the first place. We feel these things are wrong. So the fact that we develop those laws, maybe that does mean that our inclination is to not that we're not evil. But it's so interesting. I think that's a cool thing that this film makes you think about.
And if you look at many of our laws, they're created for the exception. Like how many of us actually commit murder, actually commit bank robbery or whatever? It's a very tiny minority.
Yeah.
But we have to have those laws in place to punish those people, in theory, so that they don't take over the rest of us.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. I mean,
and that's why maybe this is like an elite club of people who are drawn to this lifestyle, and it just so happens they get away with it. Now, did you get the sense? I felt like this movie was more of a critique or an attack on the rich. Literally the idea that the rich can get away with murder and perhaps do get away with murder in many cases. I wasn't sure. So you felt like it was actually talking about tourists, though, like how we treat. I wasn't sure if that was the backdrop just to illustrate this idea that the rich can get away with murder, or whether he was actually trying to say, like, as tourists in other countries, we are exploitative or we are disrespectful of other cultures. Or what did you think of those two ideas?
I think they both apply.
Yeah.
I think it would have been a harder film to clarify if you had kept it. I think they're going back to the States, so I think they're American. Those things still apply when you're back home. The rich get away with a lot of things that other people don't.
Yeah.
But it would be much harder. I think it just gives the film borders if you say they're on vacation and yada, yada. So that makes it easier to kind of put it in a box.
Yeah.
But it raises the question of, well, if these people are willing to do these things when they're away, what are they willing to do when they're at home? And what do they get away with because they have money? Or what do they expect they can get away with?
Yeah.
And I mean, you only have to watch some, crappy documentary, or real life, TV series kind of thing this is everywhere when you see rich people getting away with things that otherwise you wouldn't get away with because you wouldn't have the money to defend yourself and pay people off and do all those things, right?
Yeah. The irony of the compound was really clever.
Yeah, I thought so.
We're protecting for the locals. I'm like, oh no, we're actually protecting the locals for you.
Now, I don't know if you picked up on this, but I really liked, it reminded me of the beginning of the Candyman remake. But at the beginning where it goes upside down.
I did notice that.
And it was like, in hindsight, as I started watching the film and, got through the film, it was like, oh, I wonder if they're playing with the idea of like, this is the upside down. This is the place where you do things that are wrong, but you can get away with it. So you do it anyway. And I like that idea of flipping reality upside down. And I thought, particularly because it came at the beginning of the film, that was a clue for us about what was about to happen.
For sure. And I think someone like Brandon Cronenberg would have deliberate techniques like that, which have a meaning, or it's not just for aesthetic pleasure. So it sounds like you liked the film.
I did like the film. There was, despite my frustration at points and frustration just in my own ability to interpret, and I don't think it's my own ability. I think it's deliberate. The confusion about is this the real James? Is this the...
So do you not like the ambiguity of it?
Well, no, I'm frustrated by it, but I like it.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of like, I would say it frustrates me, but I also, it's like, oh, I really like how he's doing that. And that makes me frustrated to not know. The flip side is I don't want to be spoon fed. I don't want him to tell me, because it's a good frustration. It's that kind where you're kind of grappling with yourself and wondering, okay, what's going on? And I actually thought there was a scene that I was pleasantly surprised is a bad way to phrase it. But when they bring what they claim to be the police chief and they egg him on basically to beat up. Now, I thought, oh man, this is not going to be good. This is going to be his wife or something.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And I kept looking at the hands to see if they looked female or anything.
Interesting, yeah.
Because I thought that would be a really interesting.
Dark and sadistic,
yeah. So
actually, I kind of like that.
And then, of course, when they reveal that it's his double, that was just like such a mind fuck. It was just.
And it really shifts from like they're laughing with him to like now they're laughing at him. Like it really changes the dynamic of how he fits into this group of people. Yeah. So you don't know whether she lured him in just so they could have someone to mess with, or whether they truly wanted him to be part of their group.
Because it does
or it's a hazing ritual, or
exactly. It turns. We've already talked about Mia Goth, but it definitely ramps up rather quickly and turns very cruel and very violent.
I like that twist, because it could have just been like they continue to drag him down this road of becoming more sadistic or whatever.
Yeah.
But then it's suddenly, oh no, like maybe these people are actually out to manipulate you and abuse you. And so it kind of makes it more complex.
How did you interpret, or what did you think about the scene where they So he chooses to leave. He's on the bus. They stop the bus. They
Yeah.
get him off the bus. Then he runs away from them.
Yeah.
And that ends up culminating in a scene again with a double of himself.
The like animalistic kind
Yes.
of dog-like version
Yeah.
of himself.
And
yeah.
She well there's
I know where you're going. Yeah.
there's a part of that scene. It was like, wow. Anyway, so you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, the breastfeeding
Yeah.
thing. Yeah. So I think I read that as like these were almost a series of hazing rituals for him to endure to like join their group. And then when he finally like kills the animal and she's breastfeeding him, that's maybe like symbolic of him being like reborn, and she's like
Right.
nurturing him into their cult or their
Yeah.
group. I think that's how I read it.
Okay,
Did you
but
read it differently or?
no, I kind of had the same sense of this was a transition point for him, like a rebirth.
Yes.
So my question arises then, he passes that test, but then he's not really one of them because he's not able to disengage
Right.
at the end of the film, right? Like he stays
Yeah.
at the resort.
Right. So this is where this gets really interesting, I think. I was reading yesterday, there was an interview with one of the cast members,
Okay.
and they referred to Dr. Faustus.
Oh,
And so, as a Faustian tale, and I know I had read Dr. Faustus University
Yeah.
because of a part of the degree. Have you read that? Like
Yeah.
Christopher Marlowe?
Yeah.
So then I went and watched a recap of Dr. Faustus, and it mirrors that actually really strongly. And I think this is almost like the Dr. Faustus. So in that one, there's two angels. There's a good angel and a bad angel,
Yep.
female angels. And one is trying to tell him to leave, to not pursue like these arcane arts or whatever. And the other one's trying to seduce him to go with it. So I kind of read that as like his wife was saying like, no, you should leave this place.
yeah.
And the other one's like, no, you should go for it. And then I think Mia Goth kind of is a combination of maybe the dark angel. I think it's Mephistopheles.
Yep.
But he says to Mephistopheles, like, I don't like your demonic look. Can you look like a human? And that's where I wonder if that's where some of the faces were coming from.
Oh,
And then the other devils comes like Beelzebub and another one. So once I started watching this recap of the Dr. Faustus tale, you can see a lot of
interesting.
connections. Yeah, I was like, oh, that is so cool. And so at the end, though, so first of all, he makes the pact with the devil and has to sign in blood.
Yeah.
And that's where I wonder, like when he goes into the bath of blood and there's like this, a lot
Right.
of blood, like I wonder if that was sort of supposed to be a link to making the deal with the devil, who in this case seems to be a goth. But then at the end, like he is brought to hell, like the devils bring him in. And so I saw that like he's alone now. He's been taken away. He's been brought in by these like demonic forces.
right.
And now he's left like alone in hell. And that's kind of where the end.
Ah.
So I didn't quite make sense of it. And I was very confused. I only read this last night. And then when I watched this recap of Dr. Faustus,
Okay.
like, that is super cool. Once I heard it, I kind of had remembered that. I didn't remember watching it, but I thought that was super cool.
That is cool.
Does that sound convincing to you?
That does sound convincing to me because I couldn't quite figure out. I mean, so part of me was like, okay, that solidified for me that he was not the original James. He was a clone.
Yeah.
And I started playing with these ideas of, is he drawn to that place because he is a clone? And does that mean that Mia Goth and the others are actually still their originals
Mhm.
and could go home and leave the place? Or is he drawn to the place for a reason? Or, I mean, other part of me played with the idea of he's just broken, like they broke him.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's no way he can go back home because whether
and they
he,
leave, right?
Yeah.
So he's not part of them.
exactly.
So it's like they've gone to go get somebody else and he's now trapped in hell,
Yeah.
essentially. And so I think like he's enjoying all this power because he can do all these things and get away with it. But then eventually that clock runs out, just
Yeah.
like with the Dr. Faustus thing.
yes.
And so I think that breastfeeding thing is kind of like, okay, you're going to hell now. And
Yeah.
we're going to leave you here.
That's a really, I've read Faustus, but I didn't pick up on that connection.
I didn't
So
either until that one person brought that up.
That's very cool.
Yeah, because I was watching this little video recap and just like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. That makes sense. And I think that part of him saying like, I don't like the look of your demonic look. Can you look like a human? And then you see their demonic faces.
Yeah.
And even like starts with Mephistopheles, but then they bring in these other people, these other demons like Beelzebub, and that was maybe that other group of people. So that's very clever. That's very
Yeah.
cool. And that's what I love about these art house films as opposed to just a straightforward horror narrative is like when you figure those out or you realize this is what's happening, it's just so much more like rich and interesting.
Well, and that's why, I mean, I definitely have notes to myself about this is, well, one of my notes was, what did I just watch?
Yeah, exactly.
And then I said, what's happening at the end? Has he had a psychotic break? Which arguably you could say is happening if he's in hell, right? He's in a self-imposed hell. But I definitely have a note to myself as well about this is going to reap rewards on subsequent viewings.
Definitely.
And that's what I love about this kind of film and art house films in general. There's so much there. And sometimes it can be too much and they try to pack too much in. When the balance is right, though, you may be frustrated on your first watch, but then on subsequent viewings, you've got things to hang your hat on and things to look for. And you start to that's what he's doing there. That's what he's doing there. And that's where the payoff is.
Yeah.
It's not always in the first viewing.
And I think that's why I really appreciate Brandon Cronenberg, because I think he achieves a bit more of that balance than maybe David Cronenberg or other art house horror films that maybe go a little bit too overboard. But he still keeps it fairly contained, but has these elements that make it more rich.
For sure.
Like if you go back and rewatch it, you're kind of rewarded for that.
I think it's funny you should say that, because I think that's what I didn't like about Antiviral was that it was too far out there for me. And actually, I found the performances to be pretty lackluster. Possessor, I thought there were good performances, and this one as well. I mean, I don't think you could pull off what he's done here with weaker performances.
No, I mean, Mia Goth and Alexander Skarsgård are both amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because you have to have it believable, first of all, that Mia Goth would be attractive and alluring and could lead you down that road, but also that turning point for her to be cruel and relentless. I can't think of another actress that can pull that off in the way that she does. And
she's really impressive.
And make it believable that it's like, yes, I would follow you, and yes, you would crush me. You know what I mean? Like, she is so believable, especially, maybe not especially, but the cruelty that she can bring out in her character is chilling.
And she's young. Like, it's pretty amazing the stuff she's been able to do so far.
Yeah.
Like, she's got a long career ahead of her, I presume. Yeah, I think she was definitely the highlight. So yeah, was there anything you didn't like about the movie? I found it a bit long, perhaps.
Yeah.
There were times where maybe I was like, okay, this could just tick along a little bit faster. I think that was really my only main complaint. Not too bad, but.
Yeah, it wasn't crazy long, but I think for what it was a little bit long.
Something about his visual style I find very captivating, though.
Absolutely.
Like the techniques he uses, like it's visually always very interesting and really kind of engaging. Maybe it has like a slight, like ethereal feel to it, but I really like his filmmaking. And
I do like, I mean, the psychedelic sex scene is very unnerving. And he does have a knack for that as well. It's not, you can't point to something and say, oh, that's scary or that's horrific, but it just kind of gets under your skin. And for me anyway, it gets under my skin and it kind of rattles me a little bit. And I find, maybe arresting is the right word to use for some of his visual style. It just like gets to me, and it's like
Possessor was like that too. I think.
Yeah, exactly.
And with the body horror, I know some people have complained they thought he maybe went too overboard with the bodily fluids. They have basically every bodily fluid that you possibly have. In this movie.
Exactly.
Were you taken aback by that, or?
I don't know. I mean, yeah, there were a couple of times I was like, whoa. Yeah, was that necessary? But again, like I said, and I don't think it's fair to compare him to his father, but it's an obvious comparison simply because he seems to have gone down a similar road. I mean, he has those art house kind of films that have a considerable amount. I think his dad has more body horror, particularly in his early films.
Yeah.
He was really interested in going inside. And I think Brandon Cronenberg has similar interests as a filmmaker to his father, because I do think identity was at the heart. I mean, if I remember correctly, David Cronenberg either has a psychology degree or was studying psychology when he got into filmmaking. So he was definitely interested in some of those, aspects of the human experience. And I think Brandon Cronenberg is the same, but they are different filmmakers. And I don't want to say that he's necessarily following exactly in his father's footsteps, but he does have some, I think, similar interests and similar.
I wonder what his academic background would be, or if he has one. Or.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't even know like where he's at in terms of, so if we look, 10 years ago was his first film. I don't know how old he is now.
No, yeah, I'm not sure.
David's got to be, I'm thinking in his 70s now. So I'm guessing Brandon's probably in his 40s. Short end of it is I enjoyed the film despite my frustrations. And there was a line, I just noticed my note to myself. Mia Goth says, "Oh, you're just a little bit of fun for us on holiday." That was just like, oh my God, that was just crushing. Yeah, I've got some like all caps notes to myself as I was watching this.
Yeah, do you want to read any of those or?
Some of the, like, one of them is just like, who are these people? There's a lot of WTFs in my notes. Like, what is going on right now? I just noticed something, and maybe did he know where his passport was all along?
Right. So my understanding is he originally hid his own passport so we would have an excuse to stay on the island.
Okay, that's what I wondered too. It's like, okay, you knew that was there, but you pretended it was lost.
Right. So I think that's him making his choice. Like,
okay. Yeah.
And if you go back to the Faustian tale of the two angels, his wife saying, "Okay, let's go home," or Gabby saying, "Let's stay here." That's kind of him making his choice. Like, all right, I'm going to hide my passport. Yeah, I was a bit confused by that at first though too.
And it's really, I mean, I love that transition point in the film where they're required to watch their own execution.
That's pretty messed up.
And he's actually, I won't say delighted because that's not the right word, but he's fascinated, intrigued. His wife is horrified and repulsed by it.
Yeah.
And you can see he's drawn in. And that's the turning point, I think, for the film, because she identifies that. She goes, "How could you watch that? How
she
could
says
you?"
that to him, right? Yeah.
And then that's her, her ultimatum is, we need to leave now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, like you would think any quote unquote normal human being would like, yeah, I don't like, let's leave all our shit here and just pack up and go.
I think my favorite scene was there's the one scene where you think it's them and they're all being taken in to be executed.
Yes.
And they kill them all. And then it like cuts over to the audience and they're all clapping and watching each other die. Oh, that's really cool. Because I thought they were being killed or something. And then you realize,
that's so messed up. I mean, the idea that they're like the ones who've been there long term just love it. They totally get off on the idea that they can do this stuff and then watch themselves be executed. It's absolutely, like, it's so messed up.
Yeah. So final verdict. I actually love this film. I think it's really good. I think this will be.
I'll be watching this again.
2023 films I've seen so far. I think. Did you like this more or less than Possessor?
I only saw Possessor the one time.
Yeah, me too.
I would hedge my bets and say probably a little bit more. I think there's a little bit more there for me.
Yeah.
And because of that, Mia Goth is so good in this. Like,
having her in there helps.
Yeah.
But I think going forward, like, I'll definitely have him on my radar, and I think just like I'm really interested in what he's doing now.
Yeah.
But between this and Possessor, I think they're both very good.
But I agree with your comment. Just as we're coming to the end here, I just want to remind listeners that critic score was 87%, but the audience score was 51.
Yeah.
And that's not a surprise at all. This is going to be very polarizing, and I think it's going to be a love or hate film for most people. There's not going to be much in between.
Yeah.
You're either going to see what you and I are seeing, and that's going to intrigue you, and that's going to draw you in, or you're going to see what is there and be repulsed by and go, it's confusing. It's frustrating. I don't know what's going on. There's too much bodily fluid. There's so I think it'll be a love or hate, but it's totally understandable why the critics are at 87% because there's so much there.
Yeah. With those, like, this is like a Censor or a Titan or a Men, like, and you should probably know your own tastes well enough to know whether this is something you appreciate or not. Cause I think it's not surprising that it was 87% to 51%.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a pretty big
huge
spread.
Yeah.
But I think it just comes down to, do you like these films or not? Oh, I know one thing I want to ask about. So apparently there was an NC-17 rating version of this film and an R-rated version of this film. And apparently the NC-17 one is really extreme. But I couldn't tell if the version I was watching was the R one or the NC-17 one. And what I think I came across was, if you saw it in like film festivals, it was NC-17, but the release version is R. So if we only saw the R version and there is in fact an NC-17, even more, I think he had to cut it down or something because it was too extreme. But that's
do you know what was there that, or
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know any specific examples, but I think in terms of the body horror and stuff, it was more explicit, like over the top explicit.
Because now I'm wondering, I can't think that he would have gone further, but I could see where he would have.
Like maybe during that strobe light scene or. Which, by
Okay.
the way, if you have epilepsy, you might want to avoid this film because there's a lot of crazy
Yeah.
strobing light effects and whatnot. But
Oh, that's intriguing too, because now I'm going to have to figure out which. I'm assuming I saw the R version as well.
yeah, I don't know. Like, hopefully they would release that at some point. Or I'd be very curious to see the NC-17 version if that's indeed not the version that I saw. But I'm not clear on which version I saw. Or
Yeah,
how I
me
would know
neither
that.
now, because I didn't realize there were two versions. And if it was a festival cut, I imagine they're holding it back for a director's cut at some point.
Perhaps.
Release. I don't know.
But apparently they were like, this is a bit too much. Like, you're going to have
Wow.
to dial it back. So that's pretty crazy given
I
how
don't-
already the body horror is fairly strong in
Yeah.
this.
I'm guessing then that I didn't see the NC-17 because there was nothing like, whoa,
No.
to me. I mean, there was definitely stuff there, but nothing that's so over the top that I thought, how did this get on film?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I'm in the same boat.
So it sounds like, again, I think it's a good point. Know your taste. Like if what we're describing, I mean, if you're not really crazy about art house kind of films, if you're not willing to put the work in, because this does require something from you as a viewer, I think.
Yeah,
I
for
think
sure.
you have to invest. You have to be thinking. You have to be wondering. You have to be engaging with the film.
I do think it's entertaining enough just to watch
Yes.
on a surface level, but you'll get a lot more out of it, I think. if you-
100%, yeah.
So anyways, again, a big thank you to Max for emailing us.
Yes, thank you, Max.
Really enjoyed watching this one and talking about it. And just for any of our listeners, we always love to hear from you. So we do have our email at dudesofthedead@gmail.com. And so if you have a film you'd like us to review or any feedback or suggestions, we'd love to hear from you. So yeah, thanks for listening to this special bonus episode, and we'll see you in the aisles. Thanks so much for listening to Dudes of the Dead podcast, where Maniac Mike and Leatherface Lee break down their latest horror movie recommendations.
The show is researched, written, and hosted by Mike Vincent and Lee Neese. Produced and edited by Lee Neese. Special thanks to Aaron Jabs for the outro music. This has been a Neesely Done podcast production.